I really feel fortunate tonight that George and Maddie Boyd were able to come back and George speak to us again tonight. He spoke to us, I think it was in 1999 maybe? I kind of forget. It was, I know, maybe not that long ago, 2009, that's more like it, 2009. On January 20th of 1944, when George enlisted in the service, segregation was a big part of the American military as well as a part of Americans' daily lives. It was a time when African Americans were not allowed to serve in the military alongside whites, nor were they allowed to take pilot training at the same facility as whites. George said it was a time when the German prisoners brought stateside were treated better than African American soldiers. I don't know, how many of you have ever seen the Tuskegee Airman movie? Wow, lots. Or Red Tails. I think Tuskegee Airman was better to me, but what do you think, George?
Oh, there was something good in both of them. I like both of them.
Well, I did too. Yeah. Last year we were watching Mike Huckabee on the television show when they announced they had some Tuskegee Airmen. My mom and my son and I were watching TV. And Mike asked the Tuskegee Airmen to stand up to be honored, and we were just tickled to death to see George stand up.
Oh, yeah, George!
Yeah. We're like, yes, we know him. So that was cool. Air Force Major Boyd also served in Korea and Vietnam, and we're very, very lucky to have him back to speak with us once again. So please give him a warm Wellington welcome.
Madam President, board members, and ladies and gentlemen, I need to tell you it's always an honor to be here. And I kind of think it's more fun when I'm talking to my peers, because I see there's a lot of folks in here that are my age. And I'm somewhere in the 80s. So, welcome. And I also brought my roommate with me. That's what I call my wife. And she decided that she had better come along with me to make sure that I did my night driving well. So she's been keeping me alive for the last few years. And so I thought sometimes public acclamation is welcome. So Maddie, I want you to know, I know you helped keep me alive. Thank you so much. It's my honor to be here. And I'm going to talk about several things. Believe it or not, Ms. Klein and I have talked about what we should talk about this evening. And I have a canned speech. I'll go through that. But then I want to share some other things with you. And this is the first time I've done that. We all have dreams. And because my speech is called Keeping Our Dreams Alive, and it refers to being an American and preserving the country that we live in. Because if you're going to do anything in the world, try to do it in this country. If you're going to do something wrong, do it in this country.
Yes, sir.
Don't go overseas and do it, because we'll never hear from you again. So we can take our good, we can take our bad, and we can handle it. And that's one of the wonderful things about this country. And so I just thought I'd share that with you. But in terms of opportunity, we all have opportunity. First thing I'm going to talk about is an opportunity that I had. And I'm going to talk about it first by reading a poem. Then I'm going to show you the dream. And I need to tell you, having dreams is one thing. All dreams don't come true. But I like the opportunity to have a dream. And that's what we have here in America. You have an opportunity to do and be anything you want to be. You just have to work at it hard enough. I'm still not going to guarantee success, but after all, you got to have a chance. And that's where we are. I invented something once, and words cannot describe the feeling which I embraced with excruciating pride. Many are the hours that went into this wondrous thing. Work, rest, work some more, finally, success. And how my heart did sing. Now, why was I blessed with this idea in time and life and space? and what destiny provoked my presence in that specific place. Who ordained my trial of thought and toil and sweat? Who dealt the hand that let me win that very lucky bet? Many are the years gone by since the birth of my brainchild, and many are the reject slips to which I'm reconciled. Now heark unto me, my friends of little faith, because I will not give up my endless quest for fortune's fond embrace. My something, like a man, must be born and live and die. And to be worthwhile, it must be an apple in their eye. Who is this they who must approve of my brainchild? This they who send the reject slips to which I'm reconciled? Am I to spend my mortal life caressing this one idea, or cease this search for sunlight in the eyesight of my peers? What magic spell hangs o'er my head that drives till I'm almost dead to seek, search, hunt, and find a place in the sun for this thing of mine? Oh, finger of fate, what have you in store for my weak and mortal soul, which now is slave to things my mind and body mold? Pressing onward through trial and error with ways and means unknown, I challenge you, O destiny, to a duel I cannot win, but one which will give me sustenance until my mortal end. Now, I wrote this poem to an invention of mine, and I'm going to show you the invention. In fact, I'm going to pass these around. The name of the invention is called Dial-A-Base, and it's called a circular aviation facility chart. And guess what? My dream was overtaken by computers. And that's the fact. So I'll start here with you, sir, and then you can pass them around. You have to understand that I have no ill feeling about not getting rich, because my mother invented something that I have in my car right now, but she never knew about it. What it was a warmer, and it was invented to warm baby bottles. Well, I've got one of these things in my trunk of the car, and all I have to do is change the polarity. It'll warm the bottles or keep them cool. And she has her patent, but it was before its time. But at least we had an opportunity to do that. And as I say, we're in the record book, we tried. And you can do that too. Don't forget about Colonel Sanders. He was way up in his late years when he made it big, selling what? Fried chicken.
Good chicken.
So keep your dreams alive. I have another thing I'd like to share with you about the Tuskegee Airman. And we're not going to talk about combat and things like that this evening, because you have a little brochure that I've handed out to you, and you can study that, and you can go on the internet and find out all about the Tuskegee Airman. I'm going to talk about an award that the Tuskegee Airmen were presented, and it's called the Congressional Gold Medal. It is not the Medal of Honor. The Medal of Honor is for military valor in combat. This is a replica of the Congressional Gold Medal, and I'll send it around so everybody can see it, but I do need my nickel back. What this represents is an act of Congress. Whatever the Congress of the United States, and that's the Senate and the House, signed by the President, whatever they decide to confer a gold medal on, they get the gold medal. And the first medal was presented to General George Washington. And the Tuskegee Airmen were awarded theirs. It was signed into law in 2006, but I think it was 2007 or 8, 9, somewhere in there, when we got our awards. My memory is not as good as yours, so bear with me. I always forget things. I'm going to pass this around. Can I start over here, ma'am?
That's fine.
Thank you. And I wanted to share that with you. I had an interesting adventure when we were up at Oshkosh last year. I met Colonel Bud Anderson, who was a Jet A fighter pilot, and he was awarded the Medal of Honor, and he wears it around his neck. It's like a tie. It has a blue ribbon with white stars on it. And most of us military veterans and people that understand, when we see someone wearing that insignia, we always salute. It doesn't matter what your rank was or anything else. When you see that, you generally salute. And I had an opportunity to show for the first time, compare the Congressional Gold Medal with the Medal of Honor. And it was quite an experience. And he was sitting at our table, so we got to talk about that a little bit. I'm going to talk now a little bit about another poem that I wrote. These poems were written, this says, goes back a ways, 1963. This is the 5th copy of 5 copies of my poetry. I just wanted to let you know it's been on the shelf a long time. It's called The Cigarette Lighter. I have a cigarette lighter that I use to meet people with. The little flame is like a ray of hope. The key is friendship, the key to happiness, the key to worlds of words and conversation. The lady I didn't meet needs a light. I whip out my lighter, I prayed it would light, and it did. The quiet fellow in the corner, he's shy. His reticence is an inner sickness, and he needs help. I gave him a light, and he smiled. He moved out and danced for the first time, no longer alone. The lighter is like a small life, which I create at my pleasure. I live with it. Life is like a cigarette lighter which burns fiercely and tries desperately to start a fire. There is hope in the little flame because it always has a purpose: to light. Now, for those of you who like to fly and like airplanes and so forth, I wrote about the pilot. And being a pilot, I think I understand what I was writing about for a change. So this one says, the man who flies is desperate. He must traverse over all the world. He's a restless, insistent, curious person seeking beyond the ends of the world. His vision is way out beyond earthbound creatures. He looks down on the earth. The slow-moving, earthy people who creep around in contentment are viewed with contempt. The pursuit of time is his goal in life. If he had his way, he would arrive before he started. To be first, to be fastest, to be highest, to be best. Half man, half angel, half demon, half machine. The pilot works at transportation for transportation's sake and his soul. Space is his realm. He rules with a jealous heart and iron hand. He's fearless, yet he's afraid. He's honest, yet he lies. He flies not because of the weather, but in spite of it. And he flies, he knows not why. Sometimes he flies to wait. Sometimes he waits to fly. His every thought is flight. His soul is nourished by the rush of the wind. Life to him is a silver wing made to carry him to the end of time. Now, before you all get tired of this poetry, I have one more I'd like to share with you. It's the last poem in my book, and it's called It's All Been Said Before. Now you're going to hear some terms you probably haven't heard for years, but I'll bet you'll recognize every single one of them. A teenage girl in her own little world thinks that her life is the very most. To her, parents are icky square like nowhere. Daddy, did you have fun in the good old days? Daddy, why did they name that song, Does the Spearmint Lose Its Flavor, on the bedpost overnight? Daddy, you and Mother just can't dig our jive. Didn't you learn anything? What has time done to play such a cruel trick on the parents? This house ape with the bottomless stomach and clomping, restless feet is challenging the sanity of the household and perhaps the world. The teenager looks at the world and says, see what a mess you made? And the parents look at the teenager and says, see what a mistake I made. They glare at each other from worlds apart, each secure in the knowledge that his world is best. Time laughs and shakes with uncontrolled mirth, provoking anger and strife, knowing that in a few years the tide will turn. The good old days will belong to no one, and yet to everyone. The bohemians, flappers, zoot suiters, teddy boys, beatniks, bobsters, squares, eggheads, and Ivy Leaguers, all of an age, all ageless. The world turns, and it's all been said before. I was also asked to discuss military rank. And so what I did, I bought the Military Times insignia of United States Armed Services, and I'm going to pass that around and you can mull over it while we go through the rest of our presentation. This is in deference to Ms. Klein's request. We had quite a discussion trying to figure out what a captain in the Air Force was and a captain in the Navy. And there's quite a difference.
Yes, there is.
But that should help with the explanations. I didn't forget you.
No.
My subject is keeping our dreams alive with a brief walk through history. And I've shared some of the history, and I'm going to ask you to bear with me because when I talk about the things that I've done, I'm talking about something I know about. And lots of times we don't have an opportunity to talk about something we really know about. So that's why I'm asking you to bear with me, because I use some of my own experiences as our examples. Now, we've learned through these long years that many of our youth who are in and facing combat today have a much better focus on life than they're given credit for. And most of them have dreams similar to ours, and like my schoolmates and military comrades, many of them will not live to realize their dreams because our nation was then and is now at war. Now, most of us in Civil Air Patrol, the official volunteer auxiliary of the United States Air Force, are a part of the homeland security structure of our nation. And due to terrorist activities such as the attacks on 9/11, New York City, and Washington, D.C., Civil Air Patrol is involved in our defense against natural disasters such as Hurricane Katrina and the Greenberg, Kansas, and Joplin, Missouri tornadoes. I also might tell you that the first pictures from 9/11 that you saw in the newspapers were taken by the New York wing of the Kansas Civil Air Patrol. Not New York Civil Air Patrol, I'm sorry. Now, what do I mean when I say keeping our dreams alive? I use the word dream to help us focus on the requirements necessary to maintain our dreams of freedom and equality under the laws of the United States of America. D stands for determination and the vision needed to reach our goals. R stands for the resources and research required to meet our goals. E stands for the effort necessary to remain focused on our objectives. A stands for the ability to know and believe in our capacity and to recognize opportunity. M stands for management of our chosen objectives, leading to a successful fulfillment of our dreams. Now it seems like only yesterday when in 1944 I was a New Jersey Civil Air Patrol cadet, that 1 year later, in 1945, I would receive a certificate of completion for primary pilot training as a cadet in Army Air Corps Class 45G from Tuskegee Institute, now known as Tuskegee University. After learning to fly and completing my primary flight training at Moton Field in the Stearman Model 17D, I was washed out in the first week of basic flight training at Tuskegee because it was said that I was a cadet officer of the day and had to miss the first flight class. Now, by orders from his superiors, my instructor knew he had to eliminate or wash out many students assigned to his flight. In Class 45G, I was one of the first to go. Now, needless to say, I was devastated. I realized that meeting my career dreams in military service was to be a difficult, serious business. I also suspected that I'd been up against a contrived quota system having nothing to do with anything except the color of my skin. However, I also had to consider that apparently I did not fly the BT-13 trainer like they wanted me to. You got that one, didn't you? The official records show that of the very first Tuskegee flight trainees of Class 42C, only 5 graduated out of 13 students that entered training. And one of those graduates was General then Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. Now, knowing these facts did not diminish my dream, and the experience only strengthened my determination to become a commissioned Army officer. I also knew it was essential that we win World War II. And a little personal information. I was more interested in being an officer than I was in flying. I liked to fly, but it was something that I just liked to do. But being an officer and being a boss and telling people what to do and organizing things, that's what I like to do. I still like to do that. Amen. But that's the truth. So I thought I'd share that with you. Now, knowing these facts did not diminish my dream, and the experience only strengthened my determination to become a commissioned Army officer. But I also knew it was essential that we win World War II. Now, while in basic training at Keesler Army Airfield in Mississippi, I met with our first sergeant who told me to remember my oath to defend the entire United States and not concern myself with the fact that we were assigned to defend a section of Biloxi, Mississippi Beach, which we, as black persons, were not allowed to walk or swim on. He said that when we won the war, most of these problems would change. And that sergeant would retire as Major General Lucius D. Theus. Wow. As a 3-stripe buck sergeant, I was the last base sergeant major at Tuskegee Army Airfield. After reviewing the actual records, I learned how the World War II segregated military quota policy was employed by the Army Air Corps' Flying Training Command. For example, while the rest of the Army Air Corps was increasing its entire pilot and aircrew strength for the pending invasion of Japan, the Tuskegee program was downgraded to replace, in very limited numbers, only those pilots of the 332nd Fighter Group in the European theater where World War II was nearly over. The TWX, or telegram, message order would say, graduate 12 out of a class of perhaps 25 students. So they just had to wash out half of them. Whether they could fly or not had anything to do with it. Now make no mistake, Those of us in the flight training program were fearful and apprehensive during those war years. We did not know what was really going on, only that we were in the middle of a war and could be washed out, killed in training, in combat, or on the streets of America. And at that time, we were not known as the Tuskegee Airmen. However, we all clearly knew and understood that our success was very important to black people and other minorities all over America. We also had our dreams. However, most of them were wartime, short-term objectives, such as finish the program so we could go home and show off our wings and tell imaginary tales of heroism to our families and to the girls. We pretended that we wanted to go into combat and were not scared. The truth of the matter is that most of us were afraid and desperately wanted to survive the war. Now, as a former military flyer and Civil Air Patrol Wing commander, I always remember that every pilot or aircrew member is dependent on 20 or more people working on the ground who are necessary to provide the vital support required for the flying of aircraft, including such items as air traffic control, communications, aircraft maintenance, supplies, fuel and ammunition, security, medical and chaplain services, among other ground-based requirements. And when you consider aircraft manufacturing, replacement parts, and depot repair, the number of ground support personnel rises considerably above 20 to 1. One of my World War II Tuskegee classmates prepared a compact disc containing approximately 20,000 names of military and civilian ground and aircrew personnel who were part of the Tuskegee experience in support of the total 992 black pilot trainees. The Tuskegee Airmen could not have accomplished their airborne missions without the contributions and teamwork of the men and women of the ground support elements, several of whom were wounded or died in combat. Now, one key element for the entire Tuskegee experience was the support from the wives and families at home in America. Now, as I look back on our past challenges and opportunities, it seems incredible that many of us have lived the dreams that young people aspire to as they mature. I credit my opportunities to most important, being an American citizen and being raised by the parents and grandparents that I was blessed with. And I also clearly remember when I was growing up that a good whipping was not considered child abuse.
Attitude adjustment.
How many of you had a good whipping when you were kids? Oh, welcome to the
How many deserved it?
Oh, well, not as many hands this time. Okay. Now, please indulge me while I touch briefly on several military and civilian career opportunities and challenges which I received as a direct result of being an American citizen. Now, these are just opportunities that I had that I'm sharing with you. I was a Civil Air Patrol cadet in 1943 and 1944. I learned to fly at Tuskegee in 1944 and 45 before I could drive an automobile. I was a police officer at home during a 6-month, 22-day break in service. I was adjutant of the 100th Fighter Squadron of the 332nd Fighter Group, which were the Tuskegee Airmen. I was a squadron commander of a U.S. Air Force squadron at Fort Francis C. Warren Air Base in Cheyenne, Wyoming. I was a jet fighter radar officer with the 318th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, where we spent 14 months at Thule, Greenland on a 9-month tour. Whoa. Got that too. That's military arithmetic, by the way.
Yes.
I was an Air Force Management Engineering Staff Officer, which is the same as an industrial engineer. And when we were over in the Pacific during the Vietnam War, one of my jobs was to figure out how many people it took to do a job. And one of the classics that I like to tell you about is that we were looking at load teams. Those are the people that put the weapons on the airplanes. The airplanes have been inspected, they're all ready to fly, so then you have to bring the ordnance out and put it on the airplane. The load teams have one of the most dangerous jobs in the Air Force. As they go out and they bring the weapons and they look at what the schedule is, they arm the weapon the way it's supposed to be armed. Then they pull the pins, they put the weapons up on the TERS or MERS. Now TERS are racks and MERS are racks. One has put 3 weapons on and one you can put 2 weapons on. But they load all of these weapons on. Now you say, well, when it gets in the sunshine, it can get under the wing and cool off. No way. Not in Thailand, you didn't cool off. In Thailand, you'd have perspiration flowing out of your body. You were wet, but you could not control your body heat. And the problem was we were losing people, and we were losing load team people. And you can't lose load team people when you're loading live weapons and you're getting ready to go on a mission. So my recommendation was to put an additional load team member and shorten the time that people were exposed out on a hard stand. And so that's the kind of job I had, and then there's several others we did and looked at other requirements too. But I like to tell about that one because I had to go out there myself and find out. I was out there, and so I know it was 120 degrees out there. And I would not want a job like that anyway, myself. I was also manager of administration for Jack P. DeBoer, which is a development company here in Wichita. He designed resident inns, among others. I was also the director of the Wesley Hospital Clinic here in Wichita, where I wrote the corporate plan for the Life Watch Air Ambulance Service. I designed 2 military aircraft at Boeing Military Airplane Company, a fighter plane and a bomber. And I was Director of Aviation for the state of Kansas for 10 years and helped initiate the International Pilot Training Program at Kansas State University in Salina. Now the reason I'm telling you all of these things is because these are opportunities that I had as an American citizen right here.
Sir.
Also, I had my own business. It was called Boyd Systems Development Incorporated and Associates. We made no money, but it was a great tax write-off.
That's American.
I was a Civil Air Patrol Kansas Wing Commander for 4 years and the National Controller for Civil Air Patrol for 1 year. And I happened up on 4 degrees, a BA, an MA, and a PhD, which I earned, and then an honorary PhD from Tuskegee University.
Wow.
I had the honor of speaking at their 125th convocation. I have 5 patents. Again, I never made a nickel off them, but I'm in the record book. I had an opportunity. And if something had twisted right, I'd be a millionaire. But it didn't twist that way. It twisted the other way. And here I am talking. Okay. When speaking to various school groups, I always inform our young people, and I see that there's some with us just today, that it is absolutely essential that you finish your education. So when the window of opportunity opens, you're prepared to go through it. First of all, you got to recognize that there's a window there. Sometimes your education helps you recognize where the windows of opportunity are. Now, my personal preparation included research, study, and soliciting support of my wife, other family members, and friends. Now, we all had personal dreams which may include education, a productive career, a rewarding family life, raising successful children, and hopefully a rewarding and healthy retirement program. And I trust that your dreams include continued service to your several communities, and most important, voting at every opportunity. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for because that's none of my business, but do not lose our system of voting. That's how you survive as Americans. Think about it. There's nothing that has happened in this country that's worth anything that has not been the result of the voting of American citizens, American public. So you need to protect that at all costs. Doesn't matter who you vote for. What is important is that you vote. Now, being a national icon has its rewards, and they tell me I'm a national icon. I don't know what that means, but anyway, at my age, and as one of the younger original Tuskegee Airmen, that reward is purely a function of a healthy longevity, for which I'm grateful. As a matter of fact, I tell people I'm in the middle of my second American Association of Retired Persons Senior Citizens membership qualification. That means you're over 50, that's all that means. Now, history as we lived it in World War II was not all work, although at times we thought work was the worst thing that could happen, especially when it was kitchen police, guard duty, painting fences, or picking up cigarette butts off the parade ground. And as you might imagine, the upper class cadets were occasionally ruthless, and sometimes they would wake us up late at night and haze us. And now that hazing is illegal in today's world, it is referred to as corrective posturization. Now, I need a volunteer to help me with one of the many dodo verses dealing with time, and I know a Marine gentleman that's in this audience, and I want you to come up here. Now, what I want you to do, in drill instructor parlance, loud voice, angry, you're mad at this crew, and ask me, Mr. Boyd, what time is it? In your worst Marine Corps. Go ahead. I'm staying at attention now. Let me do it.
Mr. Boyd, what time is it?
Sir, I'm greatly embarrassed and greatly humiliated, but due to unforeseen circumstances over which I have no control, the inner workings and hidden mechanisms of my poor chronometer are in such a state of discord with the great sidereal movement by which all time is commonly reckoned, that I cannot with any degree of accuracy state the correct time. However, sir, without fear of being too far off or too far wrong, I will state that it is 25 minutes devious ticks and vibrations past the hour of 7, sir.
Well done.
We call those dodo verses. They're named after birds who are dodos, which are birds that can't fly. But the reason we had to learn those dodo verses was because you didn't fly with checklists in World War II. If you had a checklist in your airplane, the enemy could take that checklist and reinvent your airplane and use it against you. They re-engineer it is what they would do. And we did the same thing to them. You don't carry checklists, so you had to memorize everything. And we had a little book about the same size as your new calendar, just about that size, and every page on it had one of these dodo verses, and we had to memorize them. So that gives you some idea of what the training was about. Now, after serving 9 months on Guam, writing as a reporter for the Stars and Stripes, and submitting 8 applications for Officer Candidate School, I was finally entered in Class 48B, which was the very last class of Army Air Corps officer candidates selected from overseas. Now, realizing a dream come true, I graduated a second lieutenant, and my first assignment was the Lockbourne Army Airfield in Ohio, where then First Lieutenant Lucius Theus, my former first sergeant, assigned me to the 100th Fighter Squadron as the adjutant, which is an administrative officer. And sadly, my first official duty was to make funeral arrangements for one of our pilots who died in an airplane crash. In June of 1949, the 332nd Fighter Group was deactivated, and most of us were integrated into the newly created United States Air Force for worldwide duty. As a squadron adjutant, I had the awesome responsibility of interviewing every enlisted person in the 100th Fighter Squadron to determine if they wanted to integrate into the new Air Force or be separated from the service without prejudice. Most of the airmen remained in the Air Force. General, then Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., interviewed each officer in his command, including me, with similar results. Most Americans are not aware of the behavioral, cultural, and political research accomplished by the War Department, the Congress, and our colleges and universities that was necessary to implement integration of the armed forces and formation of the Department of Defense. Now, as these changes were swirling about us, I decided to try for the United States Military Academy at West Point. Colonel Davis submitted my application. However, the Army said, although qualified in all other respects, I was 8 days too old and there were no provisions for waiving age requirements. So, I never made it to West Point. During the Korean War, I served as the only black radar intercept officer with the 318th Fighter Interceptor Squadron at Thule, Greenland. My close and intimate association with the 318th Fighter Squadron is very significant in my personal life because the Thule experience represents the manifestation of all the Tuskegee Airmen had been fighting for, which was the right to defend this nation under arms in any unit based on our dedication, training, and combat skills, period. If the Department of Defense had not been racially integrated through the efforts of thousands of people in the Civil Rights Movement, millions of voting American citizens, and other dedicated citizens groups, including the Tuskegee Airmen, I would not have had the opportunity to exercise command, learn to fly with the Tuskegee Airmen, the 318th Fighter Squadron, and the Civil Air Patrol, experience combat in Vietnam, or participate in other challenging facets of integrated Air Force and civilian life. And I probably would not be speaking to you at this occasion. So let us acknowledge two outstanding acts of courage, which I believe helped to open the door of opportunity for the celebrated Tuskegee Airmen and other minority personnel in all branches of our military service. And they're presented in their order of occurrence. First, during World War II, Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt, the President's wife, made a trip to Tuskegee Institute to see if those facilities could be considered for training the black military pilots. Now, she flew with Alfred Anderson, the chief of the Tuskegee Institute Contract Flying School program. And as you might imagine, the Secret Service was very upset and called the president. And he said, I can't do anything about it from up here, or words to that effect. So Ms. Roosevelt made that historic flight. Now, the political significance of her brave act was that the several high-ranking officers and others who did not want black personnel to fly were reluctant to criticize during wartime something the Commander-in-Chief's wife had so courageously accomplished. And the rest is history. Now, for those of you who remember the culture of World War II, here's some things you might remember. You did not say anything about the president, his wife, his dog, or his girlfriend. Period. Now, you all remember that, because that was the way it was. And if you did, chances are the FBI would be knocking on your door, for real. Another act of courage was the use of our atomic capability to bring World War II to a close by President Harry Truman, a former member of the Kansas City-based Battery B, Missouri National Guard. This decisive and courageous president also signed Executive Order 9981, calling for the total integration of the United States federal government. Most people think it was just integration of the military, but that order integrated the entire federal government. There's a story about Harry Truman where he had to deal with some of the racial problems that were left over from the Civil War, believe it or not. Now, Harry Truman had difficulty seeing, so he had to go and memorize the eye chart so he could become a regular Air Force officer and become an artillery captain in World War I. And he did. And he knew the flight surgeon, and he got approved. So that's how he got to go to combat in World War I. Well, when he was very proud of this, and he went home, and he had his blue uniform on. And I thought at first it was mother, but it was his grandmother told him that he he'd be disinherited if he came home with that blue Yankee uniform on. He could wear the olive drab of the Expeditionary Force of the United States Army, but he could not come home with that blue Yankee uniform on. So he had to deal with that culture in his own home and turn around and then make these decisions that had to do with the changing of the culture of our entire country. So he had his problems. So sometimes people think that because he was president, this was going to be easy. There's nothing easy about doing a good job. You just have to do the best you can. And he had to live through those things. So I admire him for having to take on that kind of a cultural change. Now previously, I mentioned the late Lucius D. Theus when he was a first sergeant. I'd like to share with you one of the highlights of my entire life. After I'd been selected as Civil Air Patrol Wing Commander for Kansas, my wife and I were driving to Maxwell Air Force Base for Charm School, which is a training process for newly appointed wing and region commanders, where we receive lots of training but very little charm. While en route, we stopped for the night at Keesler Air Force Base, Mississippi, where I had received basic training in 1944. We were informed that a military exercise was in progress and there was no lodging available on the base. We were directed to the new Beau Rivage Hotel on the Biloxi, Mississippi beachfront. Now you must understand that here it was in the year 2000 and I had that ugly 1944 discrimination feeling in the pit of my stomach. To our delight, Maddie and I registered and received lodging in a luxury suite on the 6th floor. I gazed out the window and realized that what General Theus had visualized back in 1944 had come to pass. I asked Maddie to share this experience with me by looking out the window at the Gulf of Mexico, the swimming pool, but most important, the beach, which we were ordered to defend, but as black people could not walk on in 1944. Later, Maddie and I strolled and took pictures on that Mississippi beachfront area. With all of its real and imagined faults, I believe the United States of America is indeed the land of freedom and opportunity. And I'm thankful every day that I'm an American citizen. Now, those of us who've been in combat defending this nation know that war is hell. However, in spite of the destruction, there have been several positive changes occasioned by World War II and other conflicts with regard to the United States and its internal racial problems. Now, did America benefit? Well, look around you at the people in this gathering right here. We're here together because of a long line of dedicated American men and women such as you who believed in your faith, your values, your rights, and the rights of others, and your dreams of a positive future for your children and the United States of America. And all of us must continue to nurture and preserve our dreams. Now, what about the Tuskegee Airmen of today? Today, anyone may be an associate member of the Tuskegee Airmen Incorporated, a non-profit service organization which offers scholarships to young people regardless of cultural or racial affiliation. We encourage them to study and attain marketable skills and further to preserve the contributions to the aviation industry of America by black men and women, including the vibrant history of the Tuskegee Airmen. Now, one of the Tuskegee Airmen goals is to encourage all children to keep a positive focus on the many opportunities available to them as American citizens and to not dwell on adverse racial or cultural behavior that has occurred in the past. We want all of our young American people to understand United States history, walk proud, act and dress for success, be and do the best that they are able, and celebrate the accomplishments and contributions of all Americans. The original airmen continue to serve our nation. For example, several Tuskegee Airmen and others made a recent trip to our military personnel in Iraq. And I was one of those. We went to Iraq, Kuwait, and Qatar, and we talked to 7,000 of our service people while we were over there. That was in 2009. By now you've heard that the Tuskegee Airmen were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, which I passed around. I hope everybody's had a chance to see it, for both their distinguished service in combat and against prejudice here in America during World War II. My wife Maddie and I were honored to have been invited by Nancy Pelosi, the first woman Speaker of the House of Representatives, to attend the ceremony in the rotunda of the nation's capital at 1400 hours, 29 March on 2007. Now, during the Gold Medal Award ceremony, President Bush said, "I'd like to offer a gesture to help atone for all the unreturned salutes and unforgivable indignities." His salute to the Tuskegee Airmen was returned by the airmen, who rose to their feet in acknowledgement of the President's gesture, which represented the 300 million citizens of the United States of America. And I'm here to tell you that was a proud moment, and I was glad I was there to enjoy that. Now, oddly enough, I've heard no one thank the millions of American voters, including many here today, who realized after World War II that our nation needed a new and different direction with regard to race and human relations. Therefore, I take this opportunity to express our profound appreciation to the voters of America for sharing citizenship in what I believe is the greatest nation on earth. The Tuskegee Airman mission to the area of responsibility, which is a new name for combat zone, as panel instructors, that's what our order said, was considered worthwhile and successful. And as I said, we visited 6,000 to 7,000 U.S. and Allied service personnel. These men and women, warriors and civilians, are doing an outstanding job under adverse battle conditions while in harm's way. They are dedicated to our nation, their mission, their commanders, their fellow service personnel, their military skills, their families, and their faith. And it was an honor to visit with them. I believe our nation is in good hands, and I salute their courage and service. I wish to thank you for the kind assistance and hospitality. I consider it a signal honor to attend this occasion and be here with you and share your dreams leading to an effective and enduring future as you focus on your mission, and above all, that God, with your help, will protect and bless America. Thank you very much. I think we had scheduled a little bit of time for questions and answers, so have at it. Now, if I don't know the answer, I'm going to tell you right up front, I don't know. Yes, ma'am.
Where did you serve when you were in Thailand?
When I was in
What base?
Oh, I was stationed in Don Mueang, which is in Bangkok. But I actually had duty at all the fighter bases. I had to go on the C-47. 1 week I'd go in one direction, and the next week I'd go in the other direction. Because I had to find out each week how many blue suits, Air Force people, were in Thailand. And then I had to report to General Stilwell's office at MAC Thai, Military Advisory Command, Thailand. It was a kind of a military arrangement that was made between our government and the Thai government. So that was my job.
What years were you there?
65 and 65. Yeah, 65 and 65.
My husband was on one of those load crews.
Really?
Yes.
Well, then ask him if he remembers getting an additional member to the club, because that was one of my jobs. Thank you. Next question. Yes, sir.
Have you continued flying in your civilian life?
I have a pilot's license in my pocket, but my physical right now is not current because I just haven't gone to take it. I could probably pass the physical. But I'll tell you what I do as a person. If I'm flying in an airplane, I want to fly in an airplane that the other pilot knows how to fly it. I have a responsibility to several people. You guys on the ground, the other pilot, and me. So when you think about accepting the responsibility, I have to just say that at my age, I don't have the reflexes I used to. So if I fly with somebody for fun, okay? Yes, sir.
Wondering back when Truman made that historic decision to integrate government, were you surprised? And how was it received among the airmen?
Well, you know, I'm not sure how the other airmen felt, but I had the sense, the optimistic sense that things were going to change as a result of all the changes that were going on around us. I didn't know what was going to happen. I was happy that it happened. We had some adjustments to make too. Where we had been in the second-class citizen category, here we were now considered equal with everybody else. How do you adjust to that? So we had our own internal problems. And so it was the wonderment of discovery. That's a way to put that. And we were pleased with the results, at least what the intentions were. So that's the best I can give you for an answer on that. Any other questions?
Did you ever get
Yes,
to fly
ma'am.
a P-51?
I didn't hear you.
Did you ever get to fly a P-51?
No, ma'am, I did not. I'd say I didn't finish enough of the training program to qualify for the higher horsepower airplanes. So. Yes, sir.
In the Tuskegee College of today, was it more of a black school now, or half and half, or what?
Are you talking about the racial content of the school itself?
Yeah.
All the trainees were black. But they were not all Americans. We had some foreign officers that were from other countries that were trained with us. The faculty was mixed. We had Air Force veterans, combat veterans, and then we had other Air Force officers that had skills that we needed for training, like in the mechanics and electronics and things like that, and some of the flight instructors.
Second question, your family, you had children?
Well, I didn't have children then. My children all came after the war. At the time you went into cadets, you couldn't be married. So, and I went in 1944.
Did they allow girlfriends?
They didn't even know about girls. It wasn't a case of allow, we just had them.
Didn't you say you were 18 when you
Yes.
went in?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, for those of you who are interested, I'm 87 years old, and I'm one of the younger Tuskegee Airmen. Yes, sir.
You said you had an earned doctorate. What was that in?
Of public administration.
Public administration.
Yeah. And I'm one of the few people who had a chance to work in what I was trained in,
Yeah.
because when I became Director of Aviation for the state, that's what that was all about, public administration, transportation, and the things that supported that. Yes, sir. Any other questions? You had a question, you want to ask me it again?
Who formed this association and what year was it?
Well, I'm not sure, but I know some of the airmen got together and decided that they needed to form it, and they formed it in Washington, D.C. I'm not sure, but I think it was somewhere. I can't remember, but I can look it up. In fact, you can Google it. Tuskegee Airman Activation, but make sure you say Tuskegee Airman Incorporated, because that's the organization.
Thank you.
And I might further address your question. The Tuskegee Airmen, there's about 3 categories of Tuskegee Airmen. There's an organization called Tuskegee Airmen, Inc., which I described in my talk. There's another group of Tuskegee Airmen that we can't find because they got out of the service and they disappeared in our society. It's like a lot of veterans, they get out of the service and they're not veterans or don't want to claim veterans. They do other things. They just lose themselves from their association with the military and you never hear from them again. So there's that group. And then there's a group of people that we know about, they're Tuskegee Airmen, but they don't join the organization. So there's those three categories of people. And I know two of the airmen in Wichita, Dr. Don Jackson and Mr. Aldy Miller, both Tuskegee Airmen, but they haven't joined the organization. But we're going to have lunch with the mayor on the, what is it, the 7th of October? Yeah. The mayor asked us to come and have breakfast with him. Yes, ma'am.
I'd be interested to know where you were born, where you spent your early years.
Ma'am,
I'd be interested to know where you were born and where you spent your early years.
Where was I born and where did I spend my early years? Well, I don't really remember, but I'll tell you what they told me. Actually, I was born in a hospital in Teaneck, New Jersey. Now that's about 5 miles from New York City. If you go across the George Washington Bridge, you can go straight out 95, which goes around a little town I lived in. The city fathers wouldn't let them put the highway through the town. And when it crosses over Peck Creek, the next town is Teaneck, New Jersey. That's where I was born, and that's where I was raised, in northern Bergen County, New Jersey. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just curious, have you flown helicopters?
I've flown in helicopters, but I've never had the controls of a helicopter. It seems to me it would be kind of an adventure trying to figure out how to make a stick and something go straight up when you're used to flying forward like this. So,
How'd you happen to come to Wichita?
it was my last duty assignment. I was a management engineer and they needed a commander for the detachment we had out here, so that was my assignment.
What caused you to decide on being a part of Tuskegee?
Well, that's a good question. A friend of mine came back he was a cadet, and he'd hurt his back, and so the military separated him from the service. And he came home, he was in uniform, and I knew I had to go somewhere, but as soon as I turned 18, I didn't know what I was going to do. So he said, well, why don't you come and go to Tuskegee and try for that? I said, well, sounds good to me, and that's what I did. I joined what was called the Enlisted Reserve Corps. My mother signed me up for that because you had to have a parent sign for you. And then when you got your letter told you to report to an Air Force station or whatever to go, and it told exactly where you were going to go. So that's what happened. In fact, when I got my letter, and the day I was supposed to go to report to the bus stop, my father had to drive right past that bus stop to go to work. And he said, well, why don't you go with me? So he was going to work and I was going to war. So that's how that got started. Yes, ma'am.
This gentleman right here used to fly helicopters. He's not going to thank me for telling you that, though.
Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, I was an instructor pilot and a pilot in Vietnam. I flew UEs, right seat ballast, kind of like a co-pilot. I wasn't very proficient. Then I transferred into OH-6s, the ones that look like a football. They are a blast. And if you're going to crash, you want to crash in a helicopter. If you're going to have an engine failure, you want to have an engine failure in a helicopter. You can auto-rotate down.
Well, that's nice to know. I'll keep that in mind.
That's different than on TV.
I don't plan to do any of those things. Yes, sir. Yes.
My brother was a valley gunner on a B-17 in World War II, and they said that the Tuskegee Airman, they was asking for him to escort him after a while. You know, there's a lot of prejudice even back then, but they was asking for them to come escort them.
Well, I'll tell you one of the reasons why. Colonel Davis was a disciplinarian, and he told his pilots once they had agreed on the concept of defending the bombers, they figured out how they had to do it. They figured out if they airplanes stayed within the fighter group and stayed with the bombers through the whole raid, most of the bombers would come back, or more would come back than they had been losing. And that's what they did. And the Colonel, General Davis, he was a colonel then, he told his troops, hey, you will not be chasing enemy fighters to get combat skills. Your job is to protect the bombers.
That's right.
And he said, and if I find any of you have been chasing, you're going to have to deal with me. And that's what he told them. And so they had to rein it in and stay in formation, and the result was that they protected the bombers, which was their mission. So that's how that came about. He enforced that. Yes, sir.
When did the Army Air Corps change into the Army Air Force? And then we had the Air Force, but there was an Army Air Corps, then an Army Air Force, correct?
1947.
Well, let me tell you, first there's still an Army Air Corps. That's a corps inside the Army, like the Corps of Engineers and so forth. The Army Air Force was changed to the United States Air Force. And that took place when they integrated the Air Force, I think it was 1949.
Yeah, 49.
That's when they invented the Department of Defense, took the major services and placed them under the Department of Defense. Any other questions?
My ex-father-in-law wrote the flyer's manual for pilots in World War II, and he said without Tuskegee Airmen, we'd have never won World War II.
Well, that's a wonderful thought, but I disagree with you. I have to disagree with you because the numbers will tell you otherwise. There was only total pilots, Tuskegee Airmen pilots, there was only about just a little over 1,000 of them, of the pilots. We had 16 million Americans in uniform in World War II. So World War II would have been won with or without the Tuskegee Airmen. Just numbers will tell you that. Okay.
But maybe not as easy.
Maybe not as easy, he said.
Well, I'm not suggesting there's anything, I'm not taking anything away from what they did. I'm just saying numerically, just the numbers is telling you that it would be impossible to say that the Tuskegee Airmen, with or without them, had any appreciable difference on the outcome of the war itself. Now, the people at the Tuskegee Airmen whose lives were saved because they were guarding the bombers, they don't feel that way, so you can understand. But the numbers are what I'm talking about.
You were all great.
Didn't the Tuskegee Airmen, weren't they more or less in the European theater?
The Tuskegee Airmen, all of their combat was done in the European theater. It started in North Africa, and then it went to the last major base of assignment was Ramitelli in Italy. And they formed up there, and then the group would join up with the bomb groups, which were coming from all over where the bomb bases were, and they'd join up and go follow them with the raids. Yeah. Any other questions that I can work with for you? Well, again, no more questions. It's been my honor to be here and share, and I always enjoy sharing with my peer group. That's fun, because you all know what I'm talking about. And you've been there.